Thank you for tuning into Tanaka TV, the best and future biggest fight channel on YouTube. Don't forget to hit that like, that comment, that subscribe button. We are trying to get to 1K, maybe over 1K by my birthday, which is February 3rd. That'll be a nice, I won't even say it's a little present. That'll be a huge present for my birthday. So we're going to get right into it. Today we're going to talk about, if I was the owner of the UFC, what are some things that I would change about the organization? And now, if I was big enough, I know Dana would make comments on this, but I've got to be real. And I think that, let me start with this. I think that Dana White has done a phenomenal job with the UFC. He brought this organization from a point of nobody really watching it, and I mean this on a scale of it was not on the same level of the NFL or the NBA or the MLB. Now I think it's fair to say that it's at the level of those other organizations, those other sports organizations. The UFC is right there, and I think you have to give props where props is due. Whether you like Dana or you dislike Dana or what the Fertittas did, anybody who has had a hand in organizing this business, they have done an overall phenomenal job. However, I think there are a little bit of holes, and I may not understand the full span of how the UFC is looking to promote itself, how it's looking to be as an organization. These are just things that I see and things that I would personally change in order to make it better for what I think for the fans, how it would be for the fans. And so I'm going to start off by saying, I think, and I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again, and I'm going to keep saying it until something is done about it. Judging. I think the UFC judging is horrible. I'm just gonna put it that way. UFC judging is terrible, and it has ruined so many competitive fights because of blatant bias. There have been so many moments in fights, and it's almost either bias or just plain stupidity. Because you will see certain fights that go down that even make commentators who have been in the UFC, like a DC, like a Dominic Cruz, and it makes them cringe. It makes a lot of fans cringe because it just simply doesn't make sense. And we're not talking about the fights that are competitive, the fights that could be either one fighter or the other, just like how we saw with Duplessis and Sean Strickland. That was a competitive fight, and it could have gone either fighter's way, in my opinion. Now, people are calling out robbery. No, there have been bigger robberies. There have been like Bonnie and Clyde robberies in the UFC because of judging. And it's one thing to not allow it as the fight to go to the judge's hands. But it's another thing for it to go to the judge's hands and for it to be an outright robbery. We're talking about fights that we've seen that have gone 5 rounds, 3 rounds. One fighter pretty much dominates all 3 rounds, pretty much all 5 rounds, and it goes to the other fighter. That is unacceptable. So how do we fix this? I would say try to pick judges who have had a hand in the fight game. Not just people who are notable experts. People who understand the fight game firsthand. And they don't have to be UFC fighters or ex-UFC fighters. They can be people who just have experience. People who have an education in the business of fighting. And a lot of these judges simply do not. And so that's a big problem for me, is when it comes to judging, it ruins a lot of fights. It takes away the the special moment that really good fights hold or really good performances hold because of judging. And that just can't happen. I compare it to kind of something, I don't know if you keep up with basketball. I do keep up with, that's probably one of the only other sports that I really keep up with. I keep up with the NFL just a little bit, but I keep up with basketball a lot. And I think something that ruins basketball is the officiating, is the refereeing. A lot of it can be very lopsided, and sometimes it can come off corrupt. And I think that's how the judging is currently with the UFC. And so that is something that I would look to change, something that I would look to adjust in the very, very near future. Now, number two, what would I change? I would add more weight classes. I don't know how many. Let's see. There's a 125, 135, 145, 155, 170, 185, 205, and the heavyweights. It just goes up from there. I would look to add some weight classes, especially in between those weight classes, like the 155 to 170. That is a 15-pound gap, people. You mean to tell me that you can't add a 160, a 165-pound division? 170 to 185. You mean to tell me you can't add a 180 or 175? Now, here's why I say this. Not just so that it's easier for fighters to cut weight, because I think that would be a huge note for fighters. We have fighters cutting so much weight simply because not only that it's ideal for them, but because they have to. If you're sitting at what? We'll say if you're sitting at naturally a 160. If you're sitting at a 160, 165, do you think it would be ideal for them to cut to 145? Or to just cut that little bit of weight to 155? Now, it is what it is at the moment, right? However, you want there to be a fair opportunity for fighters to be able to cut a fair amount of weight, not have to make that decision. I believe that fighters should be able to fight at basically their natural weight. I think that would do wonders for the performances in the UFC, but also for the health of fighters in the UFC. They shouldn't have to be thinking about if they're going to fight at a more natural weight class, which I think most fighters should, or get the advantage if they were to drop 20 pounds, which is extremely dangerous. Now, a fighter has the choice of doing it, and that's up to them. However, you want there to be more opportunity for them to be able to fight at a more natural weight class. Should there be more options for them to be able to drop just 5, maybe 10 pounds? Allow there to be that opportunity. And I think it's also great for promotion. I think if you have more weight classes involved, you will have more champions involved, and you can advertise that and promote that out into the world as these are the top echelon fighters in the UFC. Look at all these champions. It's kind of what boxing does, right? To where I don't think that there's a division that's more than 6 pounds or so in boxing. Why can't it be similar to the UFC? It'll also bring more fighters into the UFC. So I think it's twofold. You'll have better performances, and you'll also have more available performances as well. So that's something that I would bring into the UFC, is more weight classes. And finally, I have one more. I would think about cross promotion for the UFC. Think about the kind of fights that the UFC can put on if they're able to cross promote. Now, again, I don't know the full span of what the UFC is trying to do as a business. However, it should be considered at least. especially with another organization that I think has a bunch of potential to have the most legendary fights of all time, because I think that should be one of the main goals of the UFC and other organizations as well. Think about a cross promotion fight, a fight card between the UFC and one championship, and I understand that this might slow down the division development of certain fighters and certain situations in the UFC. I get that. However, I also understand that the UFC is a business and they are trying to make money. Imagine the amount of money that the UFC and one championship could make. And I know one championship has stated that they would be down for the cross promotion fighting because they're trying to prove that they are the best organization when it comes to fighters. What would happen if the UFC allowed a cross promotion fight with Rod Tang or Stamp Fairtex? Can you imagine? Can you imagine what that could do for the UFC and for one championship? Now, I don't know if they're trying to help each other. I think Bellator is on its way out. I think, as far as something like bare knuckle fighting championship and things of that nature, that would be hard to cross promote. But one championship is right there with you. So why not? Why not add that extra flair to things? Make it something special. Make it a once or twice in a lifetime experience for fight fans. But why not make it happen? That's something that I would think about doing if I owned the UFC. So comment down below, people, what you would do with the UFC. Let's just say 3 changes that you would make if you owned the UFC. Comment down below what you think about what I would do. Maybe I'm missing something with the route of the choices that I've made when it comes to these things that I've stated. But I think there is truth within them. And I'll catch you guys on the next one. Don't forget to hit that subscribe, that like, that comment button. Peace.